He has a lot of advisors, qualified men and women. But Mr. Speaker, I'm just begging the ear of the President for a minute or two, that Mr. President, you have a duty of care to listen to your children. Those children on the streets are your children. They call you their president. They have told you they have challenges with the cost of living. They have told you they have challenges with the way their parents are in trouble trying to fend for them. They have told you that corruption in your government stinks to high heavens. Mr. President, listen to your children. I say this because I know there are people telling the President that if he backs down on this finance bill 2024-2025, he will look weak. That the children will think that they have won against the President. Mr. President, I want to tell you, you are not in competition with your children. You are their leader. And listening and taking good counsel, even from a child, is not a sign of weakness. It is not a sign of cowardice. It is a sign of leadership. It is a sign of strength. Listen to your children. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, the police. I was in the premises of Parliament yesterday, Mr. Speaker, when all these things were happening. And I was surprised at how police liberally use live bullets on innocent people. I was surprised, Mr. Speaker. I stood next to an officer inside the premises of Parliament. An old man, an old officer, who had covered his face, but carrying a machine gun. And he was firing at the crowds. And I'm telling him, why are you doing this? In fact, a younger officer who was standing in front of him almost slapped him and told him, how can you be firing live bullets behind me? If you want to fire live bullets, stand in front of me. And the man went on firing and shooting. So when I hear my colleagues here say that the intention was not to kill, Mr. Speaker, I ask myself, when you fire live bullets into a crowd, what do you expect? What do you expect? In fact, I really thank God that the numbers are not what this officer and officers like him intended them to be. The intention to kill was evident, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the clergy have spoken. Even as late as last evening, the clergy have spoken. Not once, not twice, many times. The Speaker, professional bodies, including the Law Society of Kenya, including teachers' organizations, including medics, professional bodies have spoken. The Speaker, the business community has spoken. Investors, both local, regional, and international, have spoken. And they have said, the ambassadors have spoken. And they have said, Mr. President, this is too much. The Finance Bill 2024-2025 is not just unacceptable, it's unbearable. The Mama Beggars were here a few days ago, and they said the same thing. Our children are speaking now. Who else, Mr. President, do you want to speak? And what other language do you want to hear? My appeal, as I sit, Mr. Speaker, is to the President of the Republic of Kenya. His Excellency, Dr. William Samoei Ruto. Don't assent to this bill. Return that bill. Let us revert to status quo. Give this country an opportunity to heal. Give expression to the voices of the children and the mothers who are saying they can't take this anymore. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to agree with me that this is the wrong time. The reasons given are the wrong reasons for us to adjourn. Let us continue our sittings. We can do all those other things. We can reflect. The Speaker, sittings and reflection are not mutually exclusive. You can have Senate sittings and still reflect on what is happening in the country. I know you don't have to be at home to reflect. The Speaker, I conclude by condoling with the families of those children, our children, that have been killed by police officers whose intention was expressly to kill. We condole those families and pray that the grace of God shall firmly rest upon them through this mourning period. Mr. Speaker, I oppose.
Senator Asige Crystal.
Thank you very much, Speaker. As the only visually impaired senator in the House, it was difficult for me to know if I would catch your eye, but I'm glad that I have. And I thank you for the opportunity to also, with some of my colleagues, oppose this motion. Mr. Speaker, I've heard a colleague use the book of Nehemiah to prosecute her support of this motion. But what exactly did Nehemiah say when he was urged to retreat? What was Nehemiah's decision when people were trying to distract him from his work? Mr. Speaker, Nehemiah said, I am doing a good work and I cannot come down. And that's what Gen Z are also saying to the executive and to members of parliament, that they are doing a good work, standing up, speaking for themselves and for their colleague young men and women who are out in the streets, Mr. Speaker, and they cannot come down. And neither should we in this Senate. How can we go on a recess Why are we going on a recess? We have just come from a 3-week recess period, Speaker. Why do we need 2 more weeks to reflect? This is a house of reflection, and we have to do it while we're sitting in these seats and when we're speaking in these microphones. That's what we're here to do. Parliament stands to represent its people. Parliament, Mr. Speaker, does not close to run away from its people. I want to urge and persuade those who have not spoken yet to also concur in opposing this motion, not because of disrespect, but because of respect for the young men and women who have lost lives, who are now muted because they cannot speak due to yesterday's horrifying scenes. We can't go home. Are we trying to say that renovations of windows and offices are more important than speaking for bloodshed and lives lost yesterday? We cannot, Mr. Speaker. And I, as a young person, as the first young person speaking to this motion, as a youth in this house, I am speaking for the youth who are outside of this house. We cannot go on a recess. It is wrong, and it would be completely insensitive to do so. Mr. Speaker, darkness fears democracy. I rarely wake up in the morning wishing for my eyesight to be restored, but what a sight to be able to behold. This last week had me aching with desire to see my fellow youth in the most spectacular display of patriotism, camaraderie, and putting up a first-rate masterclass on demanding that governments be held to account for the entire world to see. And yes, they have seen. But unity, Mr. Speaker, has been violently gunned down in the streets, not by men, but by monsters who have no concern for human life. Although this government has demonstrated that lifeless Kenyan bodies are not to take precedence over their punitive finance bill, young Kenyans have looked their oppressor dead in the eye and shown them that when it comes down to the wire, there are only 2 times to be brave: when you feel like it and when you don't. My profound disappointment with the current government and its forceful assault on crowds of innocent youth, Speaker, by its nefarious police officers who have gone rogue on unarmed young citizens peacefully exercising their constitutional right towards an uncaring, a corrupt, and wasteful government in their eyes that has turned its back on them, cannot be emphasized enough, Speaker. The brute force used against young, unarmed protesters reveals the operating system built into the fabric of today's government. And when they kill us, Speaker, they're killing themselves. The arrogance from some of these top government officials has been outrageously condescending to young people, disgusting and reminiscent of narcissistic abuse. You call us wankers and clueless children of plunderers. Then you say you're proud of us for making our voices heard peacefully. Then abduct defenseless children using state machinery and escalate a peaceful demonstration of young people with phones, twigs, and water bottles in their hands into barbaric scenes of bloodshed. Young people, Mr. Speaker, were not out to kill. In fact, I was here on this premises yesterday when everything set off. And whilst I was separated from my security guard, Mr. Speaker, I also saw another member of parliament from the National Assembly who is a wheelchair user, who voted yes to the finance bill, also having been separated from his team and his aides and bodyguard. He was stranded, Mr. Speaker, couldn't run, couldn't hide in his wheelchair. And you know what happened when those kids entered this premises? 3 young boys saw this member of parliament who voted yes for the finance bill, and instead of reprimanding him, instead of reading him their minds, giving them a piece of their minds, you know what they did? They actually carried this member of parliament in his wheelchair to the tunnel so that he can go and seek refuge across in Bunge Towers. And then the 3 boys ran back and joined their fellow comrades. That's what happened. These kids don't operate in mendacity, Mr. Speaker. They are moral youth who are just trying to get their voices heard. So this peddling of a message or narrative that these youth are evil, they are killers and criminals. They're not. That is completely misguided and untrue. Why don't these policemen punch at their own weight class, Mr. Speaker? That's my question. I've been asking myself, would they come into Parliament and try and abduct or take on a Ledama or Lekina? Would they be able to have the balls to come and abduct and violate the safety of Samson Cherargei? They wouldn't, Speaker, because they know that all they're doing is showing a brute force, using their shields and using their armor and using their artillery, pouring it on young defenseless Kenyans. And you know, clinical psychologists will tell you that narcissists will first love bomb you, then they'll manipulate you, then they'll gaslight you into believing their lies, then they devalue you, and finally, Speaker, they discard you once they have what they want. We young people have seen every single stage of these narcissistic behaviors in this government. And since they complained that over 8 million of us did not come out to have our voices heard in the 2022 elections, Mr. Speaker, we are here now. And an estimated 25 million came outside in every corner of the country yesterday to say that we reject this finance bill because we would rather die on our feet than live on our knees. We are not the generation who are silenced with every carrot dangled in front of them, Mr. Speaker. We are the generation that asks questions and demands accountability because we understand that we are rich, and only if the money that we refuse tastes better than the money that we accept. Gone are the days, Speaker, when governments can rely on using methods to numb their people through controlling the media, through controlling education, and controlling the church, which used to be houses of God, and now have turned into dens of thieves. So, Mr. Speaker, we're saying as young people, go ahead, push that narrative all you want about our international financier. That's a scapegoat, because you won't find one. Unity is our financier. Liberation, passion, justice, anger, disillusionment, and dissatisfaction are all our financiers. This is the reason why I oppose going on recess, Mr. Speaker, especially at such a sensitive time in our country. Mr. Speaker, this finance bill is without a doubt designed to be esoteric. I believe that it's relied upon for citizens not to understand this document in full. The Prime Cabinet Secretary said a few days back, if the Finance Bill 2024 fails to pass, the implications are serious. It could result in a complete shutdown of the government and signal a vote of no confidence from the public. These and many statements, Mr. Speaker, are being peddled by government officials, and none of them are true. They tell the public how ominous the failure of the passing of the bill will be, but that's not true. Yet, Mr. Speaker, if the bill were to pass without the consent of the people, it will split the entire nation, and that's not what we want to see. Mr. Speaker, the President still has an opportunity to not put pen to paper. The Constitution clearly says that he has 14 days to assent to any bill that comes from Parliament, and he can still, right now, today, in this moment, decide not to sign this bill into ascension. Mr. Speaker, I just want to conclude so I can give other members a moment to also contribute, but to just say that young people are tired. Young people are exhausted. They don't have jobs. How will they have money to look for artillery and knives and guns? But still, we poured every single piece of armor on these young children yesterday, Mr. Speaker. And as a young person myself, I am disgusted, I am appalled, I am completely beside myself. And I want to conclude by saying that my heart goes out to the families and loved ones who have lost people yesterday. Mr. Speaker, I was disappointed to hear the President's speech yesterday. I had hoped that more unity would have come from it. but there was no empathy for the pain that Kenya is feeling right now, Mr. Speaker. There was absolutely no sign of benevolence when he spoke, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would have hoped that the President would have come to unify, would have stood in that address and unified the nation, but instead he threatened. Instead he was glassy. Instead he was cold. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to comfort those in closing by saying that even though they cut our wings and tie our feet, still we will rise. Viva comrades.
Now, Honourable Senators, it is 12:30. If at 12.
Speak that if we cannot speak for ourselves, who will speak for us?
Him and killed him yesterday. What could have happened, Mr. Speaker? Because, Mr. Speaker, this constitution in chapter 14 has standards that should be applied by our police force, Mr. Speaker. And we have structures, Mr. Speaker. Under Article 145, there is only one Kenyan who should give us answers, the Inspector General of Police. He's the one who has commanding authority over the National Police Service, Mr. Speaker. Worse still, Mr. Speaker, we have the National Security Council that has supervisory powers over all the security organs, the Defense Forces, the NSIS, the National Police Service, Mr. Speaker. And that council, Mr. Speaker, the National Security Council under Article 240 is chaired by none other than the President of the Republic of Kenya, Mr. Speaker. Is he approving those kind of murdering of our youths by police force, Mr. Speaker? And we know, Mr. Speaker, that the UN Assembly of State Parties in 1979 passed a code of conduct for security organs in all countries that are members of the UN, Mr. Speaker. And when you are dealing with a demonstration, Mr. Speaker, you are not allowed to use live bullets unless the demonstrators themselves are using equal force. If you see people coming to Parliament opening fire on the police officers, that can be excused. But you're dealing with people who are invoking their right under Article 37. If they have invaded Parliament, we can invoke our laws, have them arrested, charged, taken to court. You listened yesterday, Mr. Speaker, our Chief Justice issued a statement. That's unprecedented. And he urged our security organs. He told them the courts will open beyond 6 p.m. Arrest anybody who's breaking the law and bring them to us. He didn't tell them that open fire and kill. No. So, Mr. Speaker, what happened yesterday should be condemned, Mr. Speaker. We want a country that respects the rule of law. If there are people who have broken the law, let them be arrested, be taken to courts of law, charged, tried, and if they are found guilty, they should be jailed, but not to kill demonstrators using live bullets. So I oppose this motion, Mr. Speaker, because we have serious issues that we need to prosecute and deal with now, not in July. That is what is expected of us as the people's representative, Mr. Speaker. So I oppose, I'm sorry to differ with Majority Leader, and also differ with Minority Leader, that we cannot adjourn while the country is burning. Parliament can sit even during wartime, Mr. Speaker. But if we adjourn and run away, then we are cowards. This is not a house of cowards, Mr. Speaker. We have distinguished leaders here. Let us know what are the problems facing us at this hour, at this time in our history. What are the solutions? How do we deal with them? If you adjourn today and you see the youths again demonstrating on Monday, are you going to deal with these issues from Nandi? or from Marsabit. No. You deal with the issues from here on this floor, Mr. Speaker. So I oppose this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Chirange.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From the onset, I want to empathize and sympathize with many Kenyans and police officers who have lost their lives over anarchy that we witnessed yesterday in the Republic of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, I'm also happy that most of your colleagues, including yourself, escaped unearthed. So, Speaker, extra times needs extra measures. While we agree, Mr. Speaker, that the conversation that started in good faith and with serious concerns is very valid. Mr. Speaker, we would not want to lose our country to people who want to take advantage of the situation that we are in as a country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let us remain focused. What happened yesterday at Parliament was unfortunate. It should never have happened. It should not have happened, Mr. Speaker. I remember one of my colleagues a few weeks ago, we didn't question the security systems within Parliament, and it is good the Commissioner of PAC is here, Senator Okongo Omugeni. Through you, Mr. Speaker, I wish Senator Okongo Omugeni would be listening. When we questioned, Mr. Speaker, even at the opening of the Bunge Towers, we were told there are 3 layers of security within Bunge Square. But yesterday, people had to run through ambulances, Mr. Speaker. People had to sleep in ambulances like cops, Mr. Speaker, which was very unfortunate. But when we questioned the security of Parliament the last 3 weeks ago or 1 month, we were being told we were being populist. Some of us were being threatened to be taken to powers and privileges for speaking out. And I said on this floor of the House, Mr. Speaker, that if we cannot speak for ourselves, who will speak for us? Yesterday, the people came, invaded, Mr. Speaker, the Parliament, which has never happened in the history of this republic. So, Speaker, I shudder to think that if those young men and women would have accessed Parliament when we are in session, Mr. Speaker, they would not care who you are. I saw some of my colleagues, respectively from the minority, trying to escape through the bypass. Too. And I don't want to name names, Mr. Speaker. They were calling them enemies, and they were people of the minority side who have even voted no for the finance bill. Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the country, and as leaders, we must come together. Despite our political affiliation, despite our thinking, it will not matter whether you are in the minority and majority. When the Gen Zs come for us, they will not care how you spoke or the affiliation that you have. They will only care with one thing. What have you done for this country, Mr. Speaker? What have you said? And I agree, it is the time to fight impunity, to fight corruption, Mr. Speaker, and anybody who has taken public money, Mr. Speaker, anybody who has shown arrogance and impunity, Mr. Speaker, including even counties, and I want to challenge governors, they might feel that they are safe. In fact, from the sources, allegations are appearing, the next stop is county governments, Mr. Speaker, and county institutions, because Kenyans are tired. They want to have a country. And I'm happy for the first time, as a country, we're having a conversation by the people, and for the people, for the sake of the betterment of the future of this republic, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thirdly, Mr. Speaker, I tend to disagree with the majority and minority leader. Even in terms of war, in Iraq, in Israel, and everywhere across the world, there is no way Parliament has run away from responsibility. Mr. Speaker, respectfully, while I agree there could be persuasive reasons, if we run away when our leadership is needed more than ever, we will provide leadership from Nyamira. Bishop, I will provide leadership when we are all a coward and being in our underbeds, somewhere in Nyamira, somewhere in Narok, Mr. Speaker, somewhere in Kapsabet, Mr. Speaker. This is the right time we should be sitting as Parliament and be part of the conversation on what the young people are raising. If they need, imagine if young people tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, said in their proposal, we need policy and legislative intervention. Where will we be? We will be somewhere taking care of cows in Narok or somewhere in Luanda where the market is in disarray, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let us avoid this being emotional. I know there is wisdom on adjournment. But Mr. Speaker, looking, since the chamber is somehow functional, and I've seen, on a lighter note, Mr. Speaker, you know, some of us have been having reservations of food. I saw the GNC saying the chef of Bunge should look at the recipe. They are putting too much pili-pili. But Mr. Speaker, even the functionality of our hospitality sources around are still functional up to 80%. Even, and I know although our staff also were affected, and we are with them in prayers and in thoughts. I know some of them were attacked in their offices, but we are praying with them through the clerk. But we are happy that they can get that courage. This is when leadership is needed. Mr. Speaker, if everybody closes, imagine judiciary today adjourns for 1 month, and we have had the Chief Justice saying we can even do extra hours in case there are people being brought to court. Judiciary has even said, let us sit beyond normal times. Mr. Speaker, executive is working beyond the normal time. Now Parliament, where we had the representatives of the people, Senator Ledama, where we had the representative of the people, are now going home to hide. And you know, it is unfair for the country. When the judiciary provides leadership, the executive provides, as Parliament, where we are the people represented, we should even be sitting beyond times to ban the midnight oil, Mr. Speaker, and be part of the people who will resolve the crisis, Mr. Speaker. I think we need to be serious, Mr. Speaker. I know they were, and I want to appeal, you know, under Article 37, every person has a right to demonstrate. But we want also to ask the people who demonstrate also to do it peacefully and within the confines of the rule of law. And also we want to ask the security agencies within the country to also have proper intelligence. And this calls to question the role of National Intelligence Service, Mr. Speaker. If the new Parliament would be under siege, the number of police and the organization of security structure, including the barricade and many others, Mr. Speaker, they should have ensured that they would have planned properly, Mr. Speaker, so that we would not have witnessed situations where Parliament would be invaded, where it would be disregarded, Mr. Speaker. In some democracies, it shows that we have lost legitimacy of the people, Mr. Speaker, despite that we were elected. Where you, and therefore, the security apparatus within the country should also be on lookout. While we empathize and sympathize with the police, Mr. Speaker, I have seen a police officer who lost their hands the other day, admitted. And we empathize and one has lost the life the other day. I think yesterday night in Kuturai. A number have been injured across the country. While we empathize and sympathize with the police, we ask the police command also and security agencies to be well organized so that in future, even if criminals want to infiltrate, Mr. Speaker, in these peaceful demonstrations, they can be isolated and dealt with. Let the criminals be dealt with as per the law and within the law, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I really want to plead as a country and as a Parliament. This is the moment we need to provide leadership. I am told, Mr. Speaker, as Winston Churchill said, the person who matters is the person in the ring. That has sweat and blood in trying and resolving crisis, Mr. Speaker. When in crisis, this is when leaders are made. This is when leadership is shown. Senate Minority Leader, it is not okay for us to adjourn and go home and go and do our things and watch things through social media, through TikTok, through Viusasa or any other media outlets, Mr. Speaker. It is us as a Senate, Mr. Speaker, I expected today in the morning to be sitting as a Senate. How do we become part of the solution to this process, that the challenges that we are facing as a country, Mr. Speaker? And I'm happy that you have found time, Mr. Speaker, to be here, despite the challenges that we saw yesterday, Mr. Speaker. Finally, Mr. Speaker, no, but that was the only way. It was a security arrangement using ambulance, Mr. Speaker. But we are happy you are safe. Other people who use ambulance, like Senator Jute, did not succeed. Their efforts were thwarted by well-organized, Mr. Speaker. And Senator Jute, in future, I was advising him, he should get a Red Cross ambulance and get the flag You know, those ones under the law, they cannot be stopped, and even demonstrators understand. And that is my advice to Senator Chut. Finally, Mr. Speaker, this is the right time as a country to engage into the going future. We should stop name calling, we should call for peace, we should resolve, Mr. Speaker, and ensure we remain steady focused. This country belongs to all of us, Mr. Speaker. When the country goes down, it does not matter whether you are seated on minority or majority. As a country, we must come together and resolve going into the future. With those very many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I oppose 101% against the adjournment motion. Let Parliament sit and provide leadership to the country and assist in moving the country forward. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Senator Ledama, then Senator Kathy for gender.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this motion that the Senate of the Republic of Kenya should adjourn. And in fact, I'm just nearly coming short of saying this House and government should be dissolved because we have failed and we are cowards. Let us not lie that we are not cowards. Mr. Speaker, what is leading this country right now are citizens' assemblies. Recently, there was a citizen assembly through the space of Twitter or X. It brought about over 1.2 million people to listen. This country, Mr. Speaker, is going through a crisis that is unheard of. This is a crisis, it is a fire that has been lit up by the IMF, and we know very well that IMF does not put out fires in countries, it leads them. Mr. Speaker, the only thing that makes sense today is for us to be with our citizens and try to demystify what is happening in this country. Mr. Speaker, my colleague has spoken here, Senator Mogeni, and he has pointed out the lack of respect to the rule of law by this Parliament, because the National Assembly is part of this House, where the National Assembly is amending 3 pieces of legislations that are supposed to be considered by both houses, and nobody gives a hoot in hell about the consequences. This House sat, amended the Housing Act, proposed, by then it was a housing bill, and made sure that what was being put out there, that we are building houses for the poor, those houses cannot be sold. Now, through a miscellaneous amendment, or through the Finance Act, or the Finance Bill, the National Assembly comes in and removes that, because you don't care. Mr. Speaker, some of us are being bashed outside. I am personally being bashed outside because of miscommunication. Mr. Speaker, there was a conflict of interest bill which was brought into this House. That conflict of interest bill, my colleague and I, Senator Mogeni, sat down and looked at all the provisions that were being proposed in that conflict of interest bill, which was sponsored by the IMF and a corrupt Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission of this country. Because, Mr. Speaker, there is nobody which is corrupt more than ESCC. ESCC now wanted to be put in as the body that goes out there and look for conflict of interest instead of the body that goes out there and fight corruption. Mr. Speaker, very shortly, the conflict of interest bill was prepared. It was tabled on the National Assembly by the majority leader, Kimani Ichung'wah. And in that conflict of interest bill, it was proposing to amend the following acts which exist: the Leadership and Integrity Act, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Act, Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act, Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act. And Mr. Speaker, as part of those provisions that we amended in this House, and 80% of those amendments were actually brought by my colleague. He was attending court in Narok on that day, so I read on his behalf. The one which was really vexing, Mr. Speaker, and it is important that people know out there before they just come out and shout, was in the defamation of a relative. And I want to read what the definition of a relative was. Mr. Speaker, before I even read what the definition of a relative was, that bill which was being brought here was being rushed hurriedly. The only thing we could not do was actually to reject that bill, and I now stand corrected. We should have actually rejected it in the first place. Mr. Speaker, the definition of a relative, and it is important that we read, was that it means a person who is related to a public officer by birth, marriage, common law, partnership, adoption, or affinity, and includes a public officer's father, mother, son, daughter, brother, sister, uncle, aunt, great aunt, great uncle, first cousin, nephew, niece, husband, father-in-law, mother-in-law, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, stepson, stepdaughter, stepbrother, stepsister, half-brother, half-sister, or who is the grandfather or who is the grandmother of the spouse or of the public officer. Mr. Speaker, why on earth should a relative of mine be punished because the citizen of this republic saw fit to put me in this house? A sister-in-law should not be allowed to do business with the government just because Ledamo Lekena has been elected in this house. That is ludicrous, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, when you think about it, and it is important that people read, because right now the anti-corruption is sponsoring, you know, articles in dailies to say we are being pushed out. And we know, Mr. Speaker, that the anti-corruption is the most corrupt body in this country. Most corrupt body in this country. Governors are swimming in wealth. They are buying properties. Cabinet secretaries are making billions, Mr. Speaker, on a monthly basis by taking bribes simply on issuing licenses. You issue a license and you are told pay X amount of money. Mr. Speaker, let us call a spade a spade. We have failed as this country. Mr. Speaker, 3 a.m. in the morning I couldn't sleep. I was asking myself, how powerful can a person be such that over 200 members of parliament who are elected by people to come and represent them cannot reason. They cannot use their medulla oblongata. They just go in as like sheep. They follow. They cannot ask, what are the consequences? What are the unintended consequences? Mr. Speaker, what am I going to be doing in this house? Today, I am mourning a young man from Narok County who was shot outside this parliament. This young man, I'll just remember his name, is from a family of the Shieni in Lolonga. I want to go and mourn with him. I want to go and listen. In fact, what we should do, Mr. Speaker, is that if we care about this country, we should be joining the Gen Zs on the streets and fighting for their rights. We should be joining the Gen Zs because we have failed. You know? But people don't care. We just want to line our own pockets. We just want to appear as if we are important. We are not important. Those people are the ones who have made us important, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, history has great men and women who non-violently walked across. Gandhi and his supporters worked for 240 days until they won. Mr. Speaker, in the US, Martin Luther King, the great march, they walked, and today we can see results. What stops us from doing that? We sit here and we lie to ourselves that we can be able to make a difference. Yet, nowadays we worship our party leaders, we worship the party line, we cannot remember that the people are the ones who have brought us here. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to plead with my colleagues that it is time that we join the citizen assemblies. It is time that we ask ourselves whether we really understand the phrase that power is transient. We are acting as if we will be in these seats forever, for the rest of our lives. What happened yesterday, Mr. Speaker, sir, should be a wake-up call to the citizens of this country. We should all remember that we are here for a very short time. You know what shocks me, Mr. Speaker, is that what is this thing that really pushes the president so much when blood is pouring out there to want this bill to be passed? You know, what is it? Instead of us saying, and thank you, Senator Chute, for asking a very good question that all of us are asking. Instead of us fighting corruption, going after corrupt cabinet secretaries, going after corrupt governors, we are here trying to overtax citizens. Mr. Speaker, the population of this country, 70% are Gen Zs. I'm a Gen X. I should be joining them, and I want to join them to be able to go out there and fight for these rights. Because we don't care, Mr. Speaker. We don't care. We're just busy lining our own pockets. It is sad, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to correct out there. I proposed amendments to the conflict of interest bill because it was barring the whole clan, the whole citizens of Kenya from doing business with the government. It was amending legislation which already provide that. It was being engineered by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission so that they can find many loopholes of getting money. In Masai we say, emala. You know, you have that gourd. Then you decide to open that gourd and the insects goes in when there are so many other avenues. We can easily do the right thing. This parliament can be able to check whether there is any conflict of interest. But we should not punish every other citizen. A step sister-in-law from doing business with the government. Yet, maybe they are doing business with government before I come. So, Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, the family of a young man, Erica Yunishini, my prayers are with you. The family of all the departed Gen Zs, your life will not go out in vain. Mr. Speaker, the statements which are being propelled out there to feed certain interests are further from the truth. These men and women yesterday, young men and women, were marching in the street to fight for their rights. Unarmed, Mr. Speaker. It is hard out there. So I want to beseech you, my colleagues here. This house is supposed to be a house of union. This house is supposed to be a house that brings sanity. Right now, even if we sit here and burn the midnight oil, there's nothing we can be able to do. Because we are being spoken to there, it gets into the left ear, and it pops out of the right ear. Maybe sometimes because we are enticed. Mr. Speaker, I plead with my colleagues here that right now, every one of us seated here should search deeply within his soul. Search deeply. Why are you seated where you are, Senator Lelekwe? Why are you seated where you are, Mofaya? You're seated there because, not because you fell from heaven like manna. It is because the citizen of the Rakanidhi brought you here. And you have to listen to them. So, Mr. Speaker, we have two choices, and only two choices in this country right now, is to wake up and smell the coffee and know that shit has already hit the fan. Or we resign. All of us go home, we dissolve the government, new elections are held. Let people who care about the fiduciary responsibility of this country come back here. So, Mr. Speaker, we have failed and we have got no business being here. Okay? We have got no business being here. So, Mr. Speaker, I rest my case. But I support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this motion. Mr. Speaker, I respectfully oppose this motion. Mr. Speaker, it is my view that this is the time when we should come together in a bipartisan manner to reason together on how to resolve the many issues that our children, and I'm calling them children, not in a derogatory manner, I'm calling them children because I'm a mother of Gen Zs. Mr. Speaker, the events that happened yesterday in this country are historic, not because the young people managed to break in and come to Parliament. They are historic because it was a large statement about how Parliament has failed. And the sooner we understand that, the better. Mr. Speaker, our sense of importance is so inflated as members of Parliament that we don't even get the point. Mr. Speaker, we need to calm down and remember, and I've said here more than 4 times, that we must remember we are messengers of the people. We are not lords of the people. Mr. Speaker, yesterday was the moment to make every member of Parliament to reflect and remember that we are here to represent. We are not here about ourselves, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Gen Zs and the other young people who are on the streets form over 75% of the population of Kenya. So we need to listen to them, whether we like it or not. And if we don't like it, we will actually be driven out of these houses. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, my view is we cannot run away. We need to be here to discuss the issues. Mr. Speaker, we might want to suggest that we focus on different issues rather than what we have on order paper, but we use the 2 weeks to discuss pertinent issues on what the Gen Zs have raised in their concerns. Mr. Speaker, can I request that those on the side who are speaking loudly sit down and listen, or go out and speak out there? It is a sign of disrespect for this session. Mr. Speaker, as I have said, the young people have given us enough notice about the demonstrations. They went on the streets with twigs, Mr. Speaker. And they came all the way and reached here. I was in this compound, Mr. Speaker. I was among the few MPs who are trying to plead with the security members to allow us to see whether we can speak to them. But they started shooting. And as they started shooting, they actually killed a few people. A few of those young people. After a while, they then allowed, and I believe that was deliberate, to allow the Gen Zs into the compound in order to say we shot them dead because they had come to Parliament. Mr. Speaker, this Parliament is not bigger than the people of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, none of us here is bigger than the people of Kenya. And I want to ask that the members of Parliament humble themselves. I want to ask that members of Parliament listen to what people are saying. We have mothers on the streets, if you're listening, who are actually pleading with the president and pleading with us to listen to them. What does it cost for us to listen to them? I feel even those who used ambulances were abusing our position as members of Parliament. Ambulances should have been carrying those who are sick, not members of Parliament trying to get them here. We need to smell the coffee, Mr. Speaker. What we need to do is to schedule special sessions to invite the CS Kindiki of Internal Security to find out why they used bullets on young people. We need to summon CS for Defense Aden Duale, if at all that Gazette notice he issued, if he actually issued it. Because this parliament no longer cares about the Constitution of Kenya. As Senator Omogeni has said, in fact, we should be instructing the Speaker to write an advisory to the President not to assent to the finance bill because it breached the Constitution. Through the finance bill, they have amended laws that affect counties. Therefore, the finance bill should have come to the Senate. This House should be sitting, instructing lawyers to go to court and stop the finance bill. We cannot do that if we take a break. This Senate should be sitting to find out how best can we reach out to the Gen Zs to speak with them, Mr. Speaker. They gave a notice for Thursday, assuming they're coming on Thursday. This House should be present to say, can we have the Thursday demonstrations differently done so that we are here to receive them and they come peacefully. We should not be running away. This House should be sitting to find out how many of us can be sent to represent the Senate in the different funerals of the children who have died. They should not be running away from this. Mr. Speaker, I therefore suggest respectfully that we consider reorganizing the order of the House to discuss these pertinent issues that have been raised by these children. One of each is to try and look at the budget that the Treasury submitted to the Treasury. These children have looked at this budget and they are telling us you cannot be overtaxing our parents when you are putting monies into different places. Why are we as Parliament not willing to look at the budget items in order to find out what these children are telling us? Mr. Speaker, the Gen Zs are not stupid. They are not. The Gen Zs are trying to call us to order as members of Parliament. I think we have an inflated sense of importance that we've even forgotten who we are. We need to calm down and remember we are messengers of the people. I am therefore suggesting that the remainder of the members who are speaking, please do not accept for us to go on session. Let us get back and let us sit, let us summon the necessary people we need to summon in order to discuss the issues that happened yesterday. Mr. Speaker, as a finalize, I want to empathize with all the families that have lost their loved ones. And I want to ask, as members of Parliament, let us find out who they are, let us represent ourselves and actually be humble enough to mourn with those families. I also want to ask C.S. Kindiki that all the young people you have instructed to be abducted to actually be released. Mr. Speaker, more than 10 young people have been abducted simply because they are bloggers. That is abuse of office. That is a violation of the right of expression. And we are asking that this must stop now. We must be a country that respects the rule of law.
Senator Kathy, just...
Honorable Speaker, I have captured the Honorable Kadreni Muma say that Kindiki has instructed people to abduct bloggers. I don't know whether she has that evidence that she can tell before this House that Kindiki instructed people to abduct bloggers. Is there any evidence to that effect, Honorable Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, I want to withdraw what I've said and say that the CS for internal security should bring to this House information on who has abducted young bloggers who are simply expressing themselves. It is his responsibility, he cannot run away from it. If he cannot do that, he should resign and let somebody else take responsibility. Mr. Speaker, we cannot kill our children and think we will be okay. We cannot use so much force and expect we will go into our houses and sleep. I personally cannot sleep. I cannot sleep from what I watched here yesterday, outside of the parliament, where we were pleading, but they were going on with the guns, and those kids only had twigs. The storms came because the bullets were coming. The storms came because the canisters were coming every minute. Those kids were unarmed. Mr. Speaker, I saw a clip where one police officer is contemplating resigning because his brother was killed by another police officer. I want to tell our police officers, I know your job is difficult, but remember your Kenyans. Remember you also have children. Do not allow anybody to use you to break the law. Using live bullet on an armed person is breaking the law. We need to call ourselves to order as leaders. Finally, I'm pleading with the president. Listening is not cowardice. Mr. President, listening is not cowardice. I can assure you the finance bill is not bigger than the people of Kenya. That finance bill is unconstitutional because it has phrases or it has clauses that should have come to the Senate. If your people have not told you that, please listen to us. Retreat, not even because of the Senate, retreat because of these young people. Call them and also explain boldly how you can justify the budget lines that the Treasury has actually cleared in the National Assembly. And I would want to say shame on the National Assembly for passing a budget that has budget items that are embarrassing for the nation. And that both sides of the aisle actually passed the budget. They were wrong on that. And listen to the people of Kenya. I oppose, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Wakili.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to thank you for giving me this moment to share the grief and send my messages of condolence to the many people who suffered yesterday. We lost a good number of Kenyans, both property that was destroyed not within Parliament alone, but outside Parliament, and I stand a very sad Kenyan today. I stand to support this motion because there is wisdom in the decision that the SBC did take in the morning to adjourn the House and rearrange the program of this House. Mr. Speaker, it is a very sad day because the experiences that we had yesterday from within this House and various places in the country has never happened before. While we appreciate, Mr. Speaker, the constitutional entitlement of each Kenyan to demonstrate, the demonstrations that went outside yesterday have never been experienced before. The attack on Parliament has never happened before. Colleagues here have talked. Some have supported the motion to adjourn. Some have said it is not the right thing to do. Mr. Speaker, whereas it is the time for us as a House to reflect, we cannot reflect on what happened. We cannot reflect on a way forward on the issues that have happened when the House is in session, when discussions are ongoing. Mr. Speaker, the issues that have been thrown left, right, center are heavy issues that each one of us as a leader representing certain interest, whether from our position as senators, our positions as leaders of various groups, or even at the National Assembly, are serious concerns that even as we ask ourselves the big question of whether to adjourn or not, we can only do so when we have appreciated the fact that it is not just about yesterday, it is beyond yesterday. The attack in Parliament, Mr. Speaker, alone, the safety of everyone here was at stake yesterday. It is not something that can just be taken lightly, and assuring that we can proceed to run the business of the House as if everything is normal. It is not normal. And Mr. Speaker, the issues that are there are issues that each and every one of us can at their personal level reflect. And the time with which the motion is asking that we do take a break is to allow members an opportunity to reflect and think through and begin to ask ourselves, where did the rain begin to beat us? Mr. Speaker, the comments that we are all making seems to be doing what I would say the right on the Book of Lamentations. We are not here to lament. We are here to give solutions. We are here to guide. We are here to think through. And when we support or oppose this motion as though we are all lamenting, we are not helping the situation at all. And so, the motion to adjourn is in good faith. I believe there must have been great wisdom by the Senate Business Committee to say this is the right time to take a break and deal with this situation when people of Kenya have also equally reflected on what happened in this country yesterday. Mr. Speaker, I support this motion and I appreciate the opportunity granted to me as we mourn our brothers and sisters, the young generations whom we lost yesterday, and also the destruction of their property, which as a leader, as a Kenyan, I do not support, and it's condemned with the strongest terms possible. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Senator Veronica.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this motion, which I support, that it's time to take a recess, a short recess, Mr. Speaker, for the leaders and the nation to have a deep reflection of the events that took place yesterday. Mr. Speaker, from a personal view, it's a very sad day for the history of Kenya. And Mr. Speaker, the history we wrote yesterday as a nation is not anything we can be very proud of, Mr. Speaker. Why? Because when I recall the sequence of issues that led and events that led to yesterday's experience, Mr. Speaker, it's very, very sad state of affairs. It began very well, Mr. Speaker. There was the Gen Z who needed a conversation, who needed to be heard, which is correct, and rightfully so, Mr. Speaker, because they are citizens in this republic, Mr. Speaker. And there was a guide that was given by the Minister for Security, Mr. Speaker. I remember he gave an address. He detailed how that right in Article 37, the right to demonstrate and picket, was going to be carried out, Mr. Speaker. And I also saw, Mr. Speaker, from the Law Society of Kenya, giving a sort of a guide on the do's and don'ts in the event of exercising of Article 37 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. In that guide that was given by LSK, which is supposed to be a neutral body, Mr. Speaker, the Gen Z was guided very well that they should not go near institutions, Mr. Speaker, which are secured, institutions like Parliament, places like State House. They were guided very, very well not to interfere with the integrity of the institution, Mr. Speaker. So the conversation, the morning section was good, Mr. Speaker. I was in the House and we were conducting business as usual, Mr. Speaker, but we could hear tear gas being thrown in different parts, Mr. Speaker, because of the heavy masses that had gathered. What started well in the morning, Mr. Speaker, as an exercise of that right, was breached somewhere in the middle of the day, Mr. Speaker, when now there were other demonstrators who came in and the intention seemed to have been altered from the initial conversation which was needed by the Gen Z, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the masses wanted to break down into Parliament and they started banning things, and I could see some people who are even in the dining area, Mr. Speaker, having the lunch that was served there. While having the lunch may not be a big deal because that may be money that is from the taxpayers' coffers, Mr. Speaker, and which the members, by the way, usually pay for when they take a plate of food there, Mr. Speaker. While that may not have been a big issue, and those who have visited Parliament on a normal day know that they are always free to have that lunch anytime they are cleared at the gate to visit. And Parliament has never denied access to any member of public to actually visit the institution once they give the notice, Mr. Speaker. What was very worrying was the criminal intention that rode with the demonstration, Mr. Speaker. So the police were cornered. And it is very sad, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very saddened as a mother and as a leader in this nation to imagine that one teenager or one young person lost their life yesterday, and we deeply condole with those families. That was never the intention and should never have been the intention of that demonstration, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is an apparent conflict right here, Mr. Speaker. And it is normal for a family, for a community, for institutions to even have conflicts, Mr. Speaker. But how do we resolve those conflicts? Any institution, any family that is not able to resolve conflicts in a timely fashion and in a manner where people feel listened to, Mr. Speaker, it ends up very poorly, because if it's a couple, Mr. Speaker, there will be a divorce. If it's a family, there can be a breakup. If it's an institution, people go different ways, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the reason why we need this short break now is because we need to have a serious conversation. And this serious conversation is not about us and them, Mr. Speaker. It should be a Kenyan conversation, Mr. Speaker. We must seek time, Mr. Speaker, now to listen to one another and hear what are these grievances, how can they be resolved. Does the Constitution offer a pathway for people to resolve these conflicts? I want to say this to our children, because the Gen Z are our children. The same Constitution that gave you Article 37 gives ventilation mechanism in the event that you have issues you want to ventilate to Parliament. You can do a petition, present it at the gate. Peaceably, that petition is taken, it's debated, Mr. Speaker, it is sent to a committee, members of public are invited, and they bring their views, Mr. Speaker. And I want to assure the Gen Z, the leaders who have been voted in this House, on very many occasions, they represent the views and the rights of the Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, so that we do not have integrity of institutions like Parliament, which are constitutional, Mr. Speaker, being denigrated to a point where people feel that they need to walk, maybe ban a few things, and then maybe they will be heard. That is the wrong approach, Mr. Speaker. And I think it is good we be honest with all of ourselves. As leaders, yes, we are willing to listen. Churches, open up your doors, take the views of these people, help them present the petitions, guide them the right way. Because, Mr. Speaker, even if it was in our homes, when our young people, because we live with these young people and sometimes they don't agree with us even as parents, when our young people are not happy with maybe what is being dished out at home, the schools they are being taken to, do we tell them, can you take knives and walk all over, or do things that are so unprecedented or harmful to themselves and harmful to the other members of the society? No. We guide that, Mr. Speaker. As senators, we take this recess, Mr. Speaker. Let all the institutions open doors, present their views, let those views be given to Parliament. Members of Parliament are willing to listen, Mr. Speaker. And if anything has gone wrong, it can always be corrected. There is nothing that has gone wrong that cannot be corrected, Mr. Speaker. This nation has been through a very tough journey, Mr. Speaker. Even the making of Constitution 2010. Let people not forget, Mr. Speaker, that even during the making of Constitution 2010, people did not fully agree on the clauses that were being made. Yet there was a journey and there was a process. And in that journey and in that process, we do not need to have one person lost in the Republic of Kenya, Mr. Speaker. And that is why we say, Mr. Speaker, as we take this recess, let's take a reflection, even as leaders. It is good, Mr. Speaker, for leaders that we are also sensitive, Mr. Speaker, to the plight of the people who are raising issues. So that, Mr. Speaker, when we sit down and discuss and agree on the grievances that people are having, Mr. Speaker, they need to be assured that the institution of Parliament stands to represent the people of Kenya, and that is our calling. It is the integrity of our calling. What we call upon the Gen Z to do is that as we take this recess, Mr. Speaker, and I believe and pray that the vote will be in favor of a short recess, Mr. Speaker. As we take this short recess, Mr. Speaker, our doors are open. We want to listen to you. We want to talk to the churches. We want to have the petitions that you have that you think they should be presented before Parliament, and we know we can come up with a conclusion. Because even when we later look at the constitutional amendments that we need, Mr. Speaker, even through the NADCO report, that listening has to be done, Mr. Speaker, and we are willing to do it as the institution of Parliament. And for those who planned mayhem, those who attacked institutions or businesses like a Quickmart. I saw the Quickmart somewhere downtown was attacked, raided, many places burned. Was that necessary? Was that the exercise of Article 37? Let's answer the hard questions as Kenyans. Do we want to rebuild, or do we want to destroy first and then say we want to rebuild? As young people, as parents, what we want to do for this nation is to rebuild. Mr. Speaker, if we read the book of Nehemiah, Mr. Speaker, Nehemiah was charged with the heavy responsibility of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, Mr. Speaker. I know he had a very tough task because there were those who were saying it cannot be rebuilt. This nation of Kenya, Mr. Speaker, is in the hands of not just the leaders, but the parents. It is in the hands of the youths. It's in the hands of our presidency and our deputy presidents, and we must all accept. We must work together to rebuild the walls of this nation and not to bring shame to our nation. Our nation, Mr. Speaker, is the one that has given birth to so many nations that have been in conflict around us, Mr. Speaker. And in hard times, Mr. Speaker, the true test of the strength of our nation will come when it is the hard time, Mr. Speaker. We should write a blueprint from here, Mr. Speaker, that nations that almost tilt are close to the edge of going down, Mr. Speaker, can regain and bounce back and give confidence to the people, Mr. Speaker. With that, Mr. Speaker, I beg to support the motion, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Senator Wambua.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to also add my voice to this motion. Mr. Speaker, this is not the first time that an adjournment motion is being sought after going through the necessary approvals. Mr. Speaker, I would say that perhaps this is the first time that an adjournment motion is being sought for the wrong reason and at the wrong time. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity from the onset to declare that I, on behalf of the people of Kitui County, am opposed to an adjournment at this time. And for the following reasons, Mr. Speaker. One, the Speaker, it's basic knowledge that we have three arms of government. We have the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. The other two arms of government, the Speaker, the executive, and the judiciary, are working overdrive. They are on overdrive. They are working 24 hours. The legislature is seeking to take a break before they can even formally resume from another recess. The Speaker, I want to remind my colleagues, those who are proposing the adjournment, that already we look very bad in the eyes of Kenyans. We look very, very bad. In fact, we have just a very little window to reclaim our place in society. And going out on adjournment at this time is doing the right thing, is shooting ourselves in the foot. Mr. Speaker, we are representatives of the people in good time and in bad times. An argument has been put forth, and I agree with it, that we are actually occupying a premises that for all intents and purposes is a scene of crime. Parliament has been invaded, the premises of Parliament has been invaded, and there will be need for some investigations to be carried out to ascertain the extent of damage and prepare for repairs and rehabilitation. But Mr. Speaker, the drafters of our Constitution have the wisdom and the presence of mind to know that Parliament does not necessarily have to sit in these premises. Article 126 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, and I want to persuade the Speaker if the majority whip can allow me to persuade the Speaker. I'm trying to persuade the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Article 126 of the Constitution on the location of sittings of Parliament says that a sitting of either house may be held at any place within Kenya and may commence at any time that the house appoints. The Speaker, if it is true that it is not possible to continue holding sittings at a scene of crime, we could go and sit anywhere else, including a military barrack, if that is gazetted. We could sit in the old chambers. There are places we can sit and transact business. Mr. Speaker, to adjourn at this time would be the wrong thing to do in the face of the challenges that this country is facing. We would be running away from a problem. Mr. Speaker, I want to challenge a number of my colleagues that have heard say certain things about Parliament and how, in their view, useless this house has become, and how people should perhaps resign. So, Speaker, you know, these sound bites stopped making sense to Kenyans a long time ago. Instead of a member rising and threatening that the best thing to do is for the house to be wound up, the Speaker, the right thing to do would be for a member to lead by example and tender a resignation, so that now we know people are serious. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to address myself to three institutions or four. I will begin with the institution of the Cabinet Secretary for Defense. Speaker, I see that the KDF have been asked to come in and beef up security for the police. The Speaker, wrong move. Wrong move, Mr. Speaker, because the KDF like any other defense officers in any other country in the world, are trained to do three things. And I wish the minority leader could listen to this, because he supported this motion. And the KDF are trained to do three things. One is to fight. The other thing is to kill. And the other thing is to die for their country in defense and against external aggression. The KDF is not trained in crowd control. They don't understand that language. They're not trained that way. Unless what you're saying is, now come out and kill as many as you can. Unless that is the order. The Speaker, let us keep our men and women in booths in the barracks. That's where they belong. Calling out the KDF on our children. The Speaker, that is the more reason why this Senate must sit even beyond 6:30 every day to safeguard the lives of our people and the integrity of our Constitution. The Speaker, the other institution that I want to address is the institution of the judiciary, and specifically the Chief Justice and the President of the Supreme Court of Kenya, Justice Martha Koome. The Speaker, I applaud Justice Martha Koome. She has the courage to lead from the front. I'm beginning actually to admire the way she's doing her things. Then the Speaker, at a time that young people are being arrested left, right, and center, abducted, she very well articulates the provision of Article 49 on the rights of affected persons, arrested persons. And she's saying the judiciary is ready to work overtime to hear cases, to make determinations, and to restore order in this country. Mr. Speaker, the other institution that I want to address myself to as I move towards the closure is the presidency. The Speaker, I am the least qualified to advise President William Ruto. This advice that I'm giving him is unsolicited. I know he has a lot of advisors, qualified men and women. But Mr. Speaker, I'm just begging the ear of the President for a minute or two. That, Mr. President, you have a duty of care to listen to your children. Those children on the streets are your children. They call you their president. They have told you they have challenges with the cost of living. They have told you they have challenges with the way their parents are in trouble trying to fend for them. They have told you that corruption in your government stinks to high heavens. Mr. President, listen to your children. I say this because I know there are people telling the President that if he backs down on this finance bill, 2024-2025, it will look weak. That the children will think that they have won against the president. Mr. President, I want to tell you, you are not in competition with your children. You are their leader. And listening and taking good counsel, even from a child, is not a sign of weakness. It is not a sign of cowardice. It's a sign of leadership. It's a sign of strength. Listen to your children. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, the police. I was in the premises of Parliament yesterday, Mr. Speaker, when all these things were happening. And I was surprised at how police liberally use live bullets on innocent people. I was surprised, Mr. Speaker. I stood next to an officer inside the premises of Parliament. An old man, an old officer, who had covered his face, but carrying a machine gun. And he was firing at the crowds. And I'm telling him, why are you doing this? In fact, a younger officer who was standing in front of him almost slapped him and told him, how can you be firing live bullets behind me? If you want to fire live bullets, stand in front of me. And the man bring them firing and shooting. So when I hear my colleagues here say that the intention was not to kill, the Speaker, I ask myself, when you fire live bullets into a crowd, what do you expect? What do you expect? In fact, I really thank God that the numbers are not what this officer and officers like him intended them to be. The intention to kill was evident, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the clergy have spoken. Even as late as last evening, the clergy have spoken. Not once, not twice, many times. The Speaker, professional bodies, including the Law Society of Kenya, including teachers' organizations, including medics, professional bodies have spoken. The Speaker, the business community has spoken. Investors, both local, regional, and international, have spoken. And they have said, the ambassadors have spoken. And they have said, Mr. President, this is too much. The Finance Bill 2024-2025 is not just unacceptable, it's unbearable. The mama beggars were here a few days ago, and they said the same thing. Our children are speaking now. Who else, Mr. President, do you want to speak? And what other language do you want to hear? My appeal, as I sit, Mr. Speaker, is to the President of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency Dr. William Samoei Ruto. Don't assent to this bill. return that bill. Let us revert to status quo. Give this country an opportunity to heal. Give expression to the voices of the children and the mothers who are saying they can't take this anymore. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to agree with me that this is the wrong time. The reasons given are the wrong reasons for us to adjourn. Let us continue our sittings. We can do all those other things. We can reflect. The Speaker, sittings and reflection are not mutually exclusive. You can have Senate sittings and still reflect on what is happening in the country. I know you don't have to be at home to reflect. The Speaker, I conclude by condoling with the families of those children, other children, that have been killed by police officers whose intention was expressly to kill. We condole those families and pray that the grace of God shall firmly rest upon them through this mourning period. Mr. Speaker, I oppose.
Senator Asige Crystal.
Thank you very much, Speaker. As the only visually impaired senator in the House, it was difficult for me to know if I would catch your eye, but I'm glad that I have. And I thank you for the opportunity to also, with some of my colleagues, oppose this motion. Mr. Speaker, I've heard a colleague use the book of Nehemiah to prosecute her support of this motion. But what exactly did Nehemiah say when he was urged to retreat? What was Nehemiah's decision when people were trying to distract him from his work? Mr. Speaker, Nehemiah said, I am doing a good work and I cannot come down. And that's what Gen Z are also saying to the executive and to members of parliament, that they are doing a good work, standing up, speaking for themselves and for their colleague young men and women who are out in the streets, Mr. Speaker, and they cannot come down. And neither should we in this Senate. How can we go on a recess? Why are we going on a recess? We have just come from a 3-week recess period, Speaker. Why do we need 2 more weeks to reflect? This is a house of reflection, and we have to do it while we're sitting in these seats and when we're speaking in these microphones. That's what we're here to do. Parliament stands to represent its people. Parliament, Mr. Speaker, does not close to run away from its people. I want to urge and persuade those who have not spoken yet to also concur in opposing this motion, not because of disrespect, but because of respect for the young men and women who have lost lives, who are now muted because they cannot speak due to yesterday's horrifying scenes. We can't go home. Are we trying to say that renovations of windows and offices are more important than speaking for bloodshed and lives lost yesterday? We cannot, Mr. Speaker. And I, as a young person, as the first young person speaking to this motion, as a youth in this House, I am speaking for the youth who are outside of this House. We cannot go on a recess. It is wrong, and it would be completely insensitive to do so. Mr. Speaker, darkness fears democracy. I rarely wake up in the morning wishing for my eyesight to be restored. But what a sight to be able to behold. This last week had me aching with desire to see my fellow youth in the most spectacular display of patriotism, camaraderie, and putting up a first-rate masterclass on demanding that governments be held to account for the entire world to see. And yes, they have seen. But unity, Mr. Speaker, has been violently gunned down in the streets, not by men, but by monsters who have no concern for human life. Although this government has demonstrated that lifeless Kenyan bodies are not to take precedence over their punitive finance bill, young Kenyans have looked their oppressor dead in the eye and shown them that when it comes down to the wire, there are only two times to be brave: when you feel like it and when you don't. My profound disappointment with the current government and its forceful assault on crowds of innocent youth, Speaker, by its nefarious police officers who have gone rogue on unarmed young citizens peacefully exercising their constitutional right towards an uncaring, a corrupt, and wasteful government in their eyes that has turned its back on them, cannot be emphasized enough, Speaker. The brute force used against young, unarmed protesters reveals the operating system built into the fabric of today's government. And when they kill us, Speaker, they're killing themselves. The arrogance from some of these top government officials has been outrageously condescending to young people, disgusting and reminiscent of narcissistic abuse. You call us wankers and clueless children of plunderers. Then you say you're proud of us for making our voices heard peacefully. Then abduct defenseless children using state machinery and escalate a peaceful demonstration of young people with phones, twigs, and water bottles in their hands into barbaric scenes of bloodshed. Young people, Mr. Speaker, were not out to kill. In fact, I was here on this premises yesterday when everything set off. And whilst I was separated from my security guard, Mr. Speaker, I also saw another member of parliament from the National Assembly who is a wheelchair user, who voted yes to the finance bill, also having been separated from his team and his aides and bodyguard. He was stranded, Mr. Speaker, couldn't run, couldn't hide in his wheelchair. And you know what happened when those kids entered this premises? 3 young boys saw this member of parliament who voted yes for the finance bill, and instead of reprimanding him, instead of reading him their minds, giving them a piece of their minds, you know what they did? They actually carried this member of parliament in his wheelchair to the tunnel so that he can go and seek refuge across in Bunge Towers. And then the 3 boys ran back and joined their fellow comrades. That's what happened. These kids don't operate in mendacity, Mr. Speaker. They are moral youth who are just trying to get their voices heard. So this peddling of a message or narrative that these youth are evil, they are killers and criminals, they're not. That is completely misguided and untrue. Why don't these policemen punch in their own weight class, Mr. Speaker? That's my question. I've been asking myself, would they come into parliament and try and abduct or take on a Ledama or Lekina? Would they be able to have the balls to come and abduct and violate the safety of Samson Cherargei? They wouldn't, Speaker, because they know that all they're doing is showing a brute force, using their shields and using their armor and using their artillery, pouring it on young defenseless Kenyans. And you know, clinical psychologists will tell you that narcissists will first love bomb you, then they'll manipulate you, then they'll gaslight you into believing their lies, then they devalue you, and finally, Speaker, they discard you once they have what they want. We young people have seen every single stage of these narcissistic behaviors in this government. And since they complained that over 8 million of us did not come out to have our voices heard in the 2022 elections, Mr. Speaker, we are here now. And an estimated 25 million came outside in every corner of the country yesterday to say that we reject this finance bill because we would rather die on our feet than live on our knees. We are not the generation who are silenced with every carrot dangled in front of them, Mr. Speaker. We are the generation that asks questions and demands accountability, because we understand that we are rich, and only if the money that we refuse tastes better than the money that we accept. Gone are the days, Speaker, when governments can rely on using methods to numb their people through controlling the media, through controlling education, and controlling the church, which used to be houses of God, and now have turned into dens of thieves. So, Mr. Speaker, we're saying as young people, go ahead, push that narrative all you want about our international financier. That's a scapegoat, because you won't find one. Unity is our financier. Liberation, passion, justice, anger, disillusionment, and dissatisfaction are all our financiers. This is the reason why I oppose going on recess, Mr. Speaker, especially at such a sensitive time in our country. Mr. Speaker, this finance bill is without a doubt designed to be esoteric. I believe that it's relied upon for citizens not to understand this document in full. The Prime Cabinet Secretary said a few days back, if the Finance Bill 2024 fails to pass, the implications are serious. It could result in a complete shutdown of the government and signal a vote of no confidence from the public. These and many statements, Mr. Speaker, are being peddled by government officials, and none of them are true. They tell the public how ominous the failure of the passing of the bill will be, but that's not true. Yet, Mr. Speaker, if the bill were to pass without the consent of the people, it will split the entire nation, and that's not all we want to see. Mr. Speaker, the President still has an opportunity to not put pen to paper. The Constitution clearly says that he has 14 days to assent to any bill that comes from Parliament, and he can still, right now, today, in this moment, decide not to sign this bill into ascension. Mr. Speaker, I just want to conclude so I can give other members a moment to also contribute, but to just say that young people are tired. Young people are exhausted. They don't have jobs. How would they have money to look for artillery and knives and guns? But still, we poured every single piece of armor on these young children yesterday, Mr. Speaker. And as a young person myself, I am disgusted, I am appalled, I am completely beside myself. And I want to conclude by saying that my heart goes out to the families and loved ones who have lost people yesterday. Mr. Speaker, I was disappointed to hear the President's speech yesterday. I had hoped that more unity would have come from it, but there was no empathy for the pain that Kenya is feeling right now, Mr. Speaker. There was absolutely no sign of benevolence when he spoke, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would have hoped that the President would have come to unify, would have stood in that address and unified the nation, but instead he threatened. Instead he was glassy. Instead he was cold. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to comfort those in closing by saying that even though they cut our wings and tie our feet, still we will rise. Viva, comrades.
Now, honorable senators, it is 12:30. In fact, 12:32. So pursuant to standing
Lunch, Senator Hamida has always provided meals for us. Gen Zs of Homa Bay and the Gen Zs of the Republic of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, I oppose this motion, and that then should guarantee me an opportunity to come back here and continue my debate. I want to start by sending condolences, personal and on behalf of the people of Homa Bay, to the many families that today are mourning their loved ones. The reality is hitting slowly. Many people are still in denial that the little boys and girls who left their homes yesterday are today sleeping in a morgue. Mr. Speaker, even if it was you, with a teenage or a grown son, 20-year-old, You had breakfast with him in the morning. You told him about the kind of things that you expect and wish for this nation. You reminded him that the Constitution protects him, that he can go and protest, he can go and present petitions to public authorities. Mr. Speaker, you even told him that we've got a reasonable government and we've got a reasonable security force that will ensure that you are protected. And then, Mr. Speaker, you get a call that your son is lying at City Mortuary. Your son is lying in a morgue somewhere in Eldoret. Your son is lying in a morgue in Nakuru. That is a reality we are dealing with, Mr. Speaker. We cannot run away from our constitutional mandate when we have our people lying in morgues, others lying in hospitals, others lying in detention centers. Mr. Speaker, the very least we should do is to call the CS for Interior this afternoon to come to this house to tell us the number of people who were killed yesterday while exercising their constitutional rights. Number two, the CS must tell us the number of people being held incommunicado by the police and other paramilitary forces in this republic. Mr. Speaker, we need to know how many people are in hospitals with gunshot wounds. We cannot go on recess until those questions are answered. Mr. Speaker, we need to be calling some governors, like the governor of Nairobi, to tell us what happened in Nairobi where City Hall was set aflame. Mr. Speaker, I know people are saying that when I call him to the Public Accounts Committee, he will tell me all the records were burnt by Gen Z. When you go to ask him for his academic certificate, he will tell you that it was burnt by Gen Z. We need to put a stop to this nonsense, Mr. Speaker. We cannot go on recess until these issues are resolved. Mr. Speaker, we must put a stop to the arrogance that we are seeing in the ruling class of this country. We must put a stop and make sure that people live within their means, and people who have consumed public resources do not come and vomit on our shoes and on our feet. And Mr. Speaker, we know them. Some of them are in this house. Some of them are in the executive. We cannot go on recess until we have held them to account and delivered them to Gen Z for punishment or for necessary action. Of course, action within the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, why do we want to run away from our duty when Parliament sits even when a country is at war? Is it because we don't have lunch? If we don't have lunch, Senator Hamida has always provided meals for us. Is it because we have got broken windows? Mr. Speaker, we cannot lament about broken windows when we have broken limbs and people out there. And we should also stop this blame of Gen Zs. Mr. Speaker, look at our curriculum. What have these children or these adults, new adults, been fed on in the school curriculum? These are the products of the free primary education of Mwai Kibaki and Raila Odinga. Their curriculum, when it comes to Fasihi and literature, Mr. Speaker, reads as follows. They read The Animal Farm, and it is about injustice. They read Kidagaa Kimemwozea. They read Tumbo Lisiloshiba, Kifo Kisimani, Mstahiki Meya, Mashetani, and Parliament of Alls. Mr. Speaker, that is the recent set book in literature, Parliament of Alls. And then you blame Gen Zs for coming to this parliament, a parliament of alls, a parliament of sellouts, a parliament of turncoats, a parliament that is completely insensitive to them. We are the ones who have fed them this kind of literature, and we are reaping what we sowed at this moment. Mr. Speaker, we cannot go on recess until the president apologizes to the youth of this country. Since when did the hustlers become mutineers? Since when did our hustlers and children become wankers? Mr. Speaker, since when did our Gen Zs, our children, become saboteurs? Since when did they connive to commit treason? Mr. Speaker, the youth and the public and the nation deserves an apology, not the intransigent posture that we saw from President Ruto yesterday. And leadership, Mr. Speaker, sometimes we need to go back to the Bible. Look at the book of Exodus and how God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. Not once, not twice, not thrice, but almost 5 times. But eventually, God was trying to teach Pharaoh a lesson. Pharaoh William Ruto, God is teaching you a lesson. You have hardened your heart. Your children are in morgues. They are in hospitals. You are calling them criminals. You are calling them saboteurs. Mr. Speaker, even in the hardest of circumstances, God will rescue his people. And God will rescue his children. God will rescue this nation from the clutches of people who do not care about those who put them in office. They care about state dinners in foreign lands. They do not care about the welfare of the people that they're supposed to represent. We cannot go on recess until we call the president, because the Constitution empowers us to call any person, and that includes the president, to come here as a chair of the National Security Committee and to tell us the actions that they are taking to ensure that the cost of living is managed, but also the flagrant abuse of human rights and constitutional rights is also stemmed. Mr. Speaker, we cannot go on recess until the legal committee carries out an inquiry on the circumstances that led to the mess of yesterday. Until the trade committee talks to small-scale traders in Tomboya and Ronaldingala and find out the extent of losses yesterday. Until the finance committee makes a strong case for Senate to consider the finance bill because it has provisions that relate to county governments. Until this House takes a resolution on the basis of Senator Mtata's letter that Parliament means Senate and the National Assembly, and the Senate must be involved in provision of budgets for constitutional offices and independent offices as per Article 249 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, if we went on recess until that date in July, all these things are going to happen, all these things are going to pass, and by the time we come back, it will be water under the bridge. We cannot go on recess until the Cohesion Committee calls for all relevant stakeholders to have a conversation on the intergenerational conflict and the intergenerational divide that we are seeing emerging. Mr. Speaker, we cannot go on recess until the staff of Parliament, their security, their safety and well-being is guaranteed and assured. If anyone bore the brunt of yesterday's disruption, it was our staff. Our officers were not touched, Mr. Speaker. We were safe in Bunge Towers. But many of these clerks sitting here, their windows are broken, they were shaken, the uniforms of sergeant-at-arms were taken away. Mr. Speaker, we cannot go on recess until we are told that the Commission spent 3.2 billion on an advanced security solution. It was tested yesterday. Does it work? We are not going on recess, Mr. Speaker, until we get answers to these questions. Mr. Speaker, we are not going on recess until our friends and brothers and sisters on the other political divide approach their political leader to tell him, as Pharaoh was also cancelled by his counselors, but God has designed that his heart should remain hardened. Please, our colleagues, Senator Cherargei, Senator Lelegwe, you've got the ear and access to the president. What benefit do you get by leading a dead nation, by leading an injured nation, by leading a sick nation, by leading an unhappy nation? Whose happiness is more important? Is it Joe Biden or is it the people of Kenya? President Ruto, we expect you to climb down and we expect you to respond to the concerns of Kenyans. We expect you to talk to your children. We expect you to provide leadership. If that does not happen, Mr. Speaker, the Gen Zs have shown us yesterday what they're capable of doing. Revolutions start like that. If you look and if you read A Tale of Two Cities, which is Charles Dickens' account of the French Revolution, revolutions start like it did yesterday. Do we want a revolution in Kenya? Perhaps we need a revolution. But Mr. Speaker, I conclude by crying out to my party leader, Raila Odinga. Baba, we need you. Baba, how I wish you didn't have to go to Addis Ababa. Baba, how I wish you are here to provide leadership, to provide counsel, to provide statesmanship, to provide direction for a country that is in dire need of leadership, for direction and of statesmanship. What we don't have in this country is statesmanship. We have politicians. We have people who have come across cash. They do not know how to conduct themselves in the presence of cash. Like someone who has been hungry for too long and finds a huge banquet on the table. They are now just showing us what they call madarau in Swahili. Mr. Speaker, we hope that this nation will not degenerate. Because when it goes down, it does not matter whether you're a senator or a member of National Assembly or a member of UDA or Azimio. We all go down. Baba, we need you.
Now, Senator Kajwang, I've given you 11 minutes. You've spoken for 11 minutes. courtesy of the request you made on behalf of the people of Homa Bay. Yes, Senator Peris Tobiko.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you for this opportunity. And Mr. Speaker, I take this time to oppose the motion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,